This is a story about a guy named Tex Avery. So a couple of years ago I did a video about the Disney versus DreamWorks rivalry that started in the late 90s and has pretty much been going up to now. In it I mentioned that DreamWorks, the more snarky pop culture referencing studio, was not the first company to fill that dynamic with the Disney company. That would be Warner Brothers, starting in the late 30s, all the way up to the popular decline of the short cartoon as a theatrical draw. I won't say that cartoons in the early 30s were homogenous. Obviously there was a big difference between a Disney production and a Fleischer production, but among Tex Avery's many contributions to the medium, his big contribution to Warner Brothers was steering the studio away from Disney-esque sentimentality. He began the trend of the Warner Brothers cartoons being the wise-cracking, smart-alecky, fourth-wall-breaking counterpoint to Disney's Disney. More well known among Tex Avery's creations are the characters of Daffy Duck, Bugs Bunny, Droopy, Screwy Squirrel.
You wouldn't have liked the story anyway.
Okay, I may only know that last one from a throwaway line from Roger Rabbit. But we're not talking about Warner Brothers cartoons today, because around in the early 40s, Tex Avery had a big hissy fit in falling out with the Warner Brothers studio, so he marched his way all the way to the MGM studio, home to the popular Tom and Jerry cartoons, where he directed one of his most well-known and influential cartoon shorts, Red Hot Riding Hood. That was a time when fairy tale adaptations were in. Yeah, we're actually kind of seeing this now with these Twilight knockoffs, cum really serious fairy tales. These things come in waves, I guess. And there are a lot coming out next year. A lot. So there's this thing called the 40-year rule, and it's this idea that a generation will get kind of obsessed culturally with the era 40 years prior to it. Just recent enough to be in living memory, but just long enough that it can be romanticized. We're seeing it now with the mega success of shows like Mad Men and, well, the 40-year rule. It's apparently a thing. But it was more of a thing in the late 80s, early 90s, probably because then, 40 years ago, was just cooler than our 40 years ago. It started in earnest with Who Framed Roger Rabbit, but we saw it continue for the next few years with movies like Dick Tracy and The Mask, which, yes, takes place in modern times, but borrows a lot from that late 40s cartoon aesthetic. Are you familiar with this?
22.
This. Even this. Hell, especially this. All three of these scenes are lifted directly from Red Hot Riding Hood, which in and of itself had its own 40-year rule, experiencing a big renaissance by filmmakers who were fans of it 40 years later. So even if you're not familiar with the cartoon itself, you're probably familiar with some of its iconography. So about what I said earlier about Avery steering studios away from that whole maudlin Disney sentimentality thing.
Waiting in the woods was a mean old wolf, ready to pounce upon poor little Red Riding Hood.
Oh, stop it! Waiting in the woods with a mean old wolf ready to pounce on poor...
Every cartoon studio in Hollywood has done it this way.
So in the revamped story, the wolf is now, well, a wolf in the more figurative sense. Grandma's like a madam or something.
Hiya, cousin, what's buzzing?
You see, Grandma is reading Oomph magazine. And Red, well... Some context. This was an age where helpless lady protagonists were still kind of a thing, but they were being replaced. Bear in mind this was the same year that Casablanca came out, but Fay Wray and King Kong was the decade prior, and this was about 4 years after Snow White changed everything. So I think the most interesting change to this story, aside from the backdrop and the tone, is that in Avery's cartoon, Red is not the victim. Allow me to explain. Much like Jessica Rabbit, who is largely based on her, Red is introduced on stage as a sassy, funny, singing pin-up girl. But after her number and the wolf starts to become a bit more of an unwanted creeper,
Hey, baby.
Avery takes the story back to its roots, in that it's a cautionary tale about sex. Some interpretation of the original Red Riding Hood fable is that it's a tale of sexual awakening for the young girl, with the Red Hood representing, like, the hymen or lust or something. The wolf being the lover or sexual predator who's out to get her, because, you know, that's how men roll. The interesting twist in this version isn't really that it's sexy or modern, but the cautionary tale isn't for Red Riding Hood, it's for the wolf.
What's your answer to that, babe?
Well, my answer is...
No!
The wolf is the main character, yes, but we're certainly meant to laugh at the wolf, and that, I think, is part of what makes the cartoon so enduring. Red runs to Grandma's bordello, the wolf gives chase, and in this version, not to eat the grandma, but...
At last, a wolf! Yahoo!
And the last few minutes are slapstick classic. There are some comedy moments in the cartoon that fall a bit flat.
Cigarettes, cigarettes, king size, king size.
Get it? She's tall. But the inversion of the story for the wolf really is quite funny. With Eddie Valiant, the homage to this scene is just more of a random obstacle referencing this specific cartoon. Eddie hadn't really made any unwelcome come-ons to anyone in the movie, so the gag works far better in the original short. Yeah, how do you like it, buddy? Not too much fun when someone's being all creepy and won't take no for an answer, is it? So it's interesting that there's no huntsman in this version. Sorry, Hemsworth. And neither Red nor the grandma are the victims in this version. That's not to say, however, that the wolf learns a lesson.
I'm through with women.
Men from now on.
Why, I'll kill myself before I'll even look at another babe.
The film's original conclusion had the grandma marrying the wolf at a shotgun wedding, and then the grandma and the wolf and their half-human, half-wolf baby hybrid going to see Red's show. And that version was cut out, and it's probably the print doesn't exist. Because bestiality is weird, and marriage is sacred and doesn't involve wolves. And that version, well, obviously would have been a little more rapey, because, you know, clearly the wolf didn't want a piece, but only a little more. Not much. In the end that made it to print, the wolf shoots himself, because that's better. Suicide was hilarious in the 40s. And then he dies, and then he, you know, his ghost goes back to his old ways, I guess. So, boys will be boys. So the moral of the story? No means no, kids.